Judith Thomson's 1971 paper, A Defense of Abortion, is almost certainly the most famous paper ever written on this topic. It still continues to be taught. It still continues to be wrestled with. It's a super interesting paper that comes from a super interesting time. If you think about what was going on in 1971, right? You've got Roe v. Wade, the famous Supreme Court case that was first argued maybe 71, 72, re-argued in 73, I think decided in 1973. So we've got a lot of like social, political stuff going on at this time. This paper came around at a really important time. And so whichever side of the abortion debate that you're on, this is a really important paper to read and understand. So let's talk about it. Thomson was an incredible philosopher. She was working like until the day she died. She was just amazing, prolific, wrote in ethics, wrote in metaphysics, which metaphysics is so hard. I don't know how you do it. But she's really, really famous for this paper that we're going to talk about, and also another paper that we're going to talk about in the last module for this course on the trolley problem. So we're going to read two of her papers in this course. She's just a really, really important philosopher. Now, I will say, like, the reason that I really like Thomson is also the reason that some people really don't like her. She really likes using arguments by analogy. So we're going to talk about that in a second. But Thomson is going to start her paper by going ahead and granting that the fetus is a person with a serious right to life. Remember in the last video we talked about problems with personhood, right? That there's no way to really get an account of personhood that's going to satisfy the other side of the debate. So she's just going to skip that question entirely. Now, she makes it clear she does not actually think a fetus is a person. I think there's a line in this paper that says something like, you know, a fetus is no more a person than an acorn is an oak tree, or something like that. Like, she does not think that a fetus is actually a person, but she is going to grant this just and still get her argument through. Think about how cool this is, right? Like, even if you are a strong pro-life advocate, this is a seriously sick move. You're going to go ahead and grant personhood to the fetus and still argue that abortion is permissible. That is a pretty cool move. And the way that she's going to do this is, as I mentioned, through an argument by analogy. Now, in the videos on logic, we talked about deductive and inductive arguments. Technically, arguments by analogy are inductive arguments. And they only work if the analogy kind of holds up. So let's imagine this scenario. So you wake up and you find yourself in a hospital and you're like connected through all these tubes and stuff to some guy, and you're like, well, what's going on? And somebody comes up to you like, whoa, be cool, be cool. We are the Society of Music Lovers. And yes, we did kidnap you just a little bit and then hook you up to this dude, but he's like a really famous violinist. And he's got this, you know, rare kidney disease. And it turns out you're like the only person that we can find with the same rare, you know, blood type or whatever that can cure him. So all you have to do is just stay hooked up to this guy for like 9 months. It'll give a chance for his like kidneys to get working again, and then you can unhook and you never have to see him again. So this is the violinist analogy. It is the most famous part of this paper. It is the part that everybody sort of talks about. And so we do need to spend a little bit of time thinking about and developing this case. The first thing to sort of think about is like, okay, am I like morally permitted to unhook from this violinist? The vast, vast majority of people say yes, right? Even though unhooking from the violinist will result in his death. Now, that's not to say that some people like wouldn't stay hooked up to him anyway. Whenever I teach this in my regular, you know, in-person classes, I always have a couple of students who would be like, you know what, I think I might stay hooked up to this guy. I don't want to unhook and have him die. Like, okay, that's super cool. But even they would kind of agree, like, no. Even if you unhooked, you're not doing something wrong. It's just, like, it's fine if you want to unhook. It's fine if you want to stay hooked up. But like, unhooking would be morally permissible. Now, this argument by analogy is meant to be analogous to a pregnancy as a result of sexual assault. Remember, when we talked about all of we have those 4 boxes, the different views, the vast majority of people who are like pro-life advocates, so people who are making pro-life arguments, do not allow for exceptions in cases of sexual assault. So this is going to be a direct challenge to their view, right? So don't let that important caveat sort of slip your mind. It's easy for a lot of, regular sort of lay people who aren't like involved in the argument. Most of them, or a lot of them, at least in my experience, are okay with abortion in cases of sexual assault, even if they are generally pro-life. But not like pro-life advocates, not the people that Thomson is talking to. And so the way that arguments by analogy work is that, well, the thing that, your case is describing and the thing that you're comparing it to need to be like similar in really important ways. And it looks like both of these situations have a lot in common, right? Neither one, you were kidnapped or you were, assaulted, so you did not consent to what was going on. Both the fetus and a person are going to be, the fetus and the violinist are going to be a person with a serious right to life, right? And Thomson has already granted that the fetus is a person. Neither the fetus nor the violinist is like responsible for your situation. The violinist didn't like go out and ask, hey, will you go kidnap somebody for me, please? Like, imagine he's like just unconscious in bed, like, or whatever. And in both cases, it seems like, at least this is what Thomson wants to say, in both cases, it seems like you are permitted to either unhook from the violinist or terminate the pregnancy. So all these things in common, so why not this additional thing in common? But arguments by analogy only work if there aren't serious disanalogies too. And so this is something worth considering. Again, it's not my job to tell you what to think about this argument or this case, but these are some things that people have sort of brought up. These are things that like these two cases do not have in common, right? The violinist is already, right, he's a famous violinist. He's already led like a successful life. He's, done things. The fetus hasn't even had a chance to be born yet. In the violinist case, right, it's awfully weird, right? And you're not going to be like super comfortable with the situation. But in a case of sexual assault, like there is like super obvious trauma going on here that like is going to perhaps have a moral effect on things. This third one might commit what's called a naturalistic fallacy, but I thought I'd bring it up just as something to kind of chew on. In the violinist case, you're hooked up with like surgical tubing and stuff like that, whereas with a pregnancy, right, that connection is a natural sort of connection and not an artificial one. And then another thing to kind of think about, when I unhook from the violinist, I'm just like sort of taking tubes out of my body or whatever. An abortion, and especially depending upon the stage of the pregnancy, does seem to involve more than just like a mere unhooking, okay? And so just one disanalogy, despite however many analogies there are, just one serious disanalogy can wreck an entire argument by analogy. So this is something to kind of keep in mind as you're evaluating Thomson's argument. And, again, like I love this about Thomson. I love her arguments by analogy. In the paper, she goes on to talk about all kinds of different scenarios with, people seeds and burglar bars and, all kinds of different stuff. And, some of the analogies are a little bit strained, if I'm honest, but I love engaging with them. But I will say, like, that is something that some people just kind of don't like about Thomson. We're going to see when she engages with the trolley problem, she kind of does the same thing. A lot of just sort of arguments by analogy and thought experiments and things like that. I think it's awesome. It's okay if you don't, though. Plenty of smart people, don't like this kind of way of argument. But there's another really important move that Thomson is going to make here that we need to highlight. Most people, when they think of what a right to life is, they think it's a right to not be killed, right? If you kill me, surely you violated my right to life. Sort of like if I'm like talking and like the government suppresses my speech, well, that's a violation of my, right to speech or whatever. But Thomson says, hold on a second, that's not quite right. A right to life isn't just a right to not be killed, it's the right to not be killed unjustly. This is an important addition here. And furthermore, having a right to life does not entitle you, she says, to things that you need to survive. So she gives this example of Henry Fonda. He was a famous actor. That like, even if his cool hand upon my fevered brow would cure me of, whatever illness I might have, I don't have a right to his touch. I don't have a right to his body. Right here we're kind of seeing a version of a right to body argument that's a little bit more developed and a little bit more careful than the one that we engaged in the last video. So it would be awfully nice of Henry Fonda to come lay his hand upon me and heal me, but I am not entitled to it. I don't have a right to it. And especially if it's something that somebody else has a right to. So, what she's going to say here is, yes, this is a killing, and you are killing a person. She's going to grant all of that. But it is not an unjust killing, and so it is not a violation of the fetus's right to life. What an interesting move. There's a lot to engage with here and a lot to think about. Now, let's be a little bit clear here. Thomson is not going to say that abortion is like permissible all the time. She gives this sort of like threshold, and this is at the end of the paper. She talks about what she calls a minimally decent Samaritan. So not a good Samaritan. You might have heard of the Good Samaritan parable. This is not that. This is a minimally decent Samaritan. And as an example of this is a pregnant person who is very, very pregnant, say 8 months pregnant or whatever. And they want to go on holiday. Their doctor says, there is no way that you can fly, being this pregnant. And so they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to go get an abortion then so I can go on my holiday. Thomson says, like, that does not meet the standards of a minimally decent Samaritan, right? It falls below that threshold. And so this is a violation of that idea. So this is going to maybe capture circumstances in which abortion is not going to be permissible, or at least not obviously permissible. She can sort of wiggle in with a little bit of gray area here. And so that's an interesting kind of move. Now, I will say, a number of people sort of pointed this out, that like Thomson seems to have misunderstood what the Good Samaritan story is about. Because, right, when Jesus is telling this story about a Good Samaritan, his point is, you should be like the Good Samaritan. You shouldn't be a minimally decent Samaritan. We need to hold our standards higher than that. And so Thomson might have missed the point here a little bit, but whether or not that's the case, this is going to be some kind of standard. It is a little bit vague, but some kind of standard at which we can maybe find a cutoff for when abortion no longer is permissible, or at least like enters a gray area for her. But that's Thomson's pro-choice argument, the violinist analogy. This is the reading that you guys have for this module. It's a fascinating reading with a lot of different cases to engage with and a lot of fun stuff to talk about. In the next video, we're going to talk about Don Marquis and his pro-life argument. I'll see you then.